Welcome back, everybody. We're in John chapter 13 this week. And this chapter, let me figure out how to describe it. Deep and dark. It says where Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. Here's what I want you to do, though. As you're getting started, read verses 1 through 3 only and stop. Don't read ahead, okay? I know what happens at the title, if you read the title above that, but just read verse 1 through 3. I want you to read it. John sets up in these 3 verses some very important facts, okay? He's kind of leading you one way. And I want you just to meditate on those 3 verses. See what those 3 verses say. What do you anticipate that John's point is trying to get across in these verses? Then go and read verse 4 and see what happens, what changes. It kind of goes back to when John was writing in John chapter 11, verse 3, when it says that that Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He loved them. And then he stayed 2 days. It's one of those kind of twists and turns. So read verse 1 through 3, meditate on it, see where John's leading you. And then in verse 4, see where he takes you in the writing of that, okay? Very insightful on that. As you're going through, 2 characters really come out. 2 main characters come out in this passage, okay? It's a guy named Judas, and it's a guy named Peter. And what I want you to do is I want you to read just chapter 13 only. What do you learn from Peter just by reading this passage? What do you learn from Judas just by reading this passage? And as you're going through, I want you to look at it from another disciple's perspective. Another disciple mentioned is the one that Jesus loved. Many people interpret that to be John as the writer. He didn't mention himself. He just always described himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, or that he loved Jesus. And he has a conversation with Jesus at Peter's unction, motivation. And when you read that, just look at it from John's eyes. As you're reading and you're thinking about everyone sitting around that table, what are your initial thoughts when you read this passage? Put yourself in their shoes. How do you see it? And as you're going down, what are the disciples, their reaction to when they hear about a betrayer? How do they respond to it? And where would you put yourself if you were one of the disciples around the table? How would you react as you're going into that? But also look at it from a Peter perspective. When Peter's talking about it, whether it's the washing of the feet or the I'll never betray you part, and at the bookends of the chapter, put yourself in Peter's shoes, and what do you think is going through Peter's mind in this? And all the time you're doing this, John introduces another character there. When he talks about Judas, there's the character of the devil. Why did John insert the devil here? Think about it from John's perspective. Remember, John's older at this point, writing, looking back. And as you read this passage, he comes back and he specifically mentions the devil twice in this passage. So look over it. See what you find there, okay? This is some like I said, this is kind of on the dark side, but it's deep. It's rich stuff. A lot of times we take bits and pieces of this and we read it instead of reading it all as one. And by doing that, we may miss out on some of the flow of the passage. So read the whole, after you read verse 1 and 3, then go back and just read the whole chapter a couple times. And what you're going to see is that things are getting tense. Things are getting, as you see it, funneling down to the end. But in the midst of that, you see that there is depth in Jesus' conversation with his disciples. And there's going to be depth from this point forward as we sit at the Last Supper with the disciples, and as we talk and we focus on the last words of Jesus before the crucifixion. Enjoy reading the passage. We'll catch you next week. John chapter 13. In the intro, I said you need to read verses 1 through 3. The story I'm going to tell begins there. So if you haven't done that, I want you to do that exercise first before you continue on listening to this passage. John chapter 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus knew that his time had come. And knowing that it was his time to depart, and having loved his own who were here, Jesus, during supper, when the devil had already entered into Judas, and he knew the plans that were going to take place, Jesus, having all authority that was given to him, rose up, took an apron, took a wash basket, and he washed his disciples' feet. And as he comes to Peter and he washes Peter's feet, Peter says, Lord, don't wash my feet. I won't allow it. He says, if I don't wash your feet, then you have nothing to do with me. And Peter says, well, then don't just wash my feet, but wash everything on my body. Wash my whole body, my hands, my head as well. And Jesus responds and says, those that are clean only need to be clean what's dirty, which is their feet. And he says, you call me teacher, and that is true. So do what I do. If I'm your teacher, you will be my follower when you follow my example. Jesus sets the example by washing his disciples' feet. And you will know these things, and you will be blessed. Hope you enjoy the story. Really dive into John 13. See you next week.